when you're rapidly deployed and you're not really sure exactly where you're going or who you're going to work for, there's a lot of loneliness there for anyone who's got the term commander in their title. But this is what mitigated that. I was sitting on an aircraft with some of the finest Americans we've ever put in uniform, some of that sitting right next to a battalion commander that had an unbelievable amount of respect for. And there was immense comfort and confidence knowing, like, you know what, when this ramp drops, this group right here is going to figure it out. We will uphold the honor of the division and the veterans that started that war.
Hello, fellow leaders, and welcome to the Military Leader Podcast. I am Drew Stedman. I've studied leadership for 3 decades. I've put those lessons into practice as a U.S. Army officer, and I am passionate about growing leaders from every profession. In this podcast, you'll find conversations with today's most successful leaders. My goal is simple: to deliver insight to help you become a better leader and develop those around you. My conversation today is with U.S. Army Colonel Teddy Kleisner. Teddy recently completed Brigade Command in the 82nd Airborne and has a down-to-earth yet inspirational leadership style that I personally got to witness when I followed him into Battalion Command several years ago. In this chat, Teddy recounts how he led the brigade through a very short-notice deployment to support the Afghanistan withdrawal in 2021. He also shares his formula on how to spend adequate time with soldiers and not get stuck in meetings all day. And then toward the end, Teddy gets a little controversial and explains why he doesn't buy into the idea that leaders should create a vision for every unit or organization they lead. I know you're going to get a lot out of this episode, and when you do, I want to challenge you to take the next step. Here's your call to action. First, do something with what you learn. Write down what strikes you, reflect on it, and then put it into practice so that you can become a more effective leader for your team. Second, share this episode with other leaders who would appreciate it. You can do that by sharing it with your network or on social media, or you could send a link to your team and include your thoughts about what impacted you. Remember that good leaders act as conduits and not roadblocks when they come across something valuable. And finally, take a moment to leave a rating on whatever platform you're listening or watching on. Those reviews and comments go a long way towards putting this conversation in front of the leaders who could benefit from it. And don't forget to check out themilitaryleader.com, where you can find this episode and a ton of other leadership writing and resources. Okay, let's get to my conversation with Colonel Teddy Kleisner. Thank you for joining me today, and lead well. Teddy, it's great to have you on, and thanks for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, it's awesome to be here, and there's no finer organization probably than the 23rd Infantry Regiment. I think you'd agree.
That's right. That's right. Tomahawks. I was just
moving my bias in this podcast.
Yeah, I've got a box of Tomahawks that continues to grow over the years. Yeah. So on that, let's just go ahead and get distracted off the bat here. This last command, so I got to command 1st Brigade, as you know, but it's got 223 in there, and so I have the honor of getting to serve in or with every single Tomahawk battalion, which was really cool. It was really special to be around Tomahawks again. It's kind of neat. Yeah, kind of. Teddy, again, thanks for joining today. I want to throw a question at you here that will that maybe challenge you a little bit, and but it does link actually to a little bit of the history that we were just talking about a second ago. So, if you could transport yourself back to any battlefield in not just U.S. history but any history, what would that be? What battlefield would that be, and why?
Yeah, and we tease this out a little bit as we were just warming up. But I finally picked an actual battle as we were getting started. What I'd like to describe is why I'm picking a battle, why I've chosen the one that I did. And it has to do with some studying I did in my last combat deployment. And it's the study of how do you create a sense of urgency in an organization that is somewhere on the spectrum of panicking and just stuck in their own inertia and doing nothing, right? When you as a leader recognize, we need to establish a sense of urgency, and those folks over there are losing their minds, and these people over here acting like it's just any other day. In some of the research that I was able to do, I think spelled it out pretty in a cool way. And a lot of it said, look, one of the ways that you establish urgency is have a plan, communicate the plan, and then be present with the organization in the, at least in the establishment, like getting that plan onto rails, right? Because that's unbelievably hard to do when you're in one of those situations where not everybody spots the issue, or those that do are taking it in two opposite directions. So the battlefield that I have in mind is the 23rd Infantry Regiment battle, which is, I'd love to be an RTO in Colonel Freeman's command post. The moment that they were up on the Chinese border and they were like, uh-oh, like we're not winning anymore. In fact, the entire, United Nations forces are retreating as fast as they possibly can. Every unit on our flanks has crumbled. What do we do? Right. And we kind of know how that one played out. Freeman put all of his units on the high ground and kept them consolidated. And by night, they would go into tight perimeters. By day, they would move fast on the ridge tops and not in the valleys. And so he was able to extract his organization whole. And that's where a lot of his veterans started nicknaming the unit the Billy Goats before I think it was 52 when the final nickname Tomahawk stuck. But that's the battle, and that's why. How did Freeman, when everyone around him was being routed, keep his organization together? Right.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. There's a what comes to mind for me is sensing that environment. What part, like you said, there are people on all ends of the spectrum. There's partly the soldier's job, partly the leader's job. Depends on what state of mind they're in, where they are in the battlefield, as you mentioned. Are they in a place where they can, where they can sense that? Do you have an example that comes to mind in your career that where there was a crisis or close to crisis, and you kind of this played out for you?
Probably the earliest example would be as a brand new lieutenant, or not brand new. I was an HHCXO, and I just moved to our sister battalion that was going to Kosovo. Right, kind of a short notice thing. Back when Kosovo was like opportunity of a lifetime, right? Little did we know what was coming, right? And I showed up, and the first sergeant was at his master leaders course. The company commander was gone. I don't remember why. And this organization had not really received and done anything with its orders to deploy. And so the whole battalion was like 10 steps ahead. And I showed up from the sister battalion. I was like, oh man, this is the HHC, and no one's done a single thing to actually move this unit. So that was probably my first test, when it was like, we have to establish some urgency here. And I look around, I'm like, I guess it's on me. I'm the only one here. And that was fun, and we figured it out. And some of the relationships I built in the process were awesome. The most recent, obviously, was in the evacuation of Kabul, and where I got to really watch some great leaders handle this exact issue. My commanding general at the time, the primary one, right? Because like I described earlier, show up and have a plan. Communicate it, but be present, right? The leadership laboratory that battle provided, presence was the secret ingredient of that commanding general. And I'll never forget that. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, why don't we take a second, if you would, and walk us through that? Because it's such it really is a defining moment of your career. I mean, I would imagine that everything that you've been trained and prepared for built you up to this moment where you were called out, no notice, put on the spot, and gone into a situation where you didn't expect the mere days earlier. So can you walk us through that experience?
Yeah. I'll start with this though. Because there was absolutely a crisis. And in the way that we deployed, our brigade was deploying, but our division was not. And so, we get this call on a Thursday around lunchtime, and on Saturday morning, we're going wheels up. And I kind of felt utterly alone. I was like, all right, I'm going to get there, and we won't be the only unit, but I don't know who my boss is going to be yet. I'll figure that out.
Yeah. So say it again, the timeline though. So did you say Thursday you were notified?
Thursday at 1400, we were sitting there watching a Charlie Company commander assume his guidon. And no kidding, like as the guidon's being moved, everyone's phones start going off. And we weren't blindsided by this. Like this was something that was brewing. So that was Thursday at 1400, and Saturday morning it was a beautiful sunrise, pink skies at Charleston Air Force Base because we were resurfacing Pope. When we went wheels up, and in fact, at the moment that we went wheels up, we didn't know where we were going. We knew why we were going. We didn't know if we were going to stop in Kuwait and Lager or if we were going straight in.
Yeah,
we figured that out en route.
So about 40 hours from phone calls going off to wheels up in a separate location. So you had to get to Pope. I mean, you had to get to Charleston. You know, I mean, for anybody listening, I mean, there are very few people who have gone through that level of responsiveness. Just think about that, though. I mean, 48 hours to be on the other side of the world. There aren't many corners of the Army that can pull that off either. So, I mean, did the organization respond well, or was it just pandemonium for 48 hours?
Well, there's nothing. Let's come back to this point though about force projection, but there's nothing graceful or efficient about rapidly deploying an organization in a crisis, even when it's one that you generally anticipate, especially when your own installation is not the deployment platform. So it was a lot of people working around the clock. It was a lot of leaders just using disciplined initiative and figuring things out. All unified under kind of just the common purpose of this is when C-17s are going to be ready. So it was wild. But let's. There's a topic that's sort of under the surface here that we can sidebar on for a moment. And the topic is like, what's the point of training, or what's the point of the Army of Readiness that we are now? And this is a kind of an issue that affects like your saw gunner, right? A lot of these young men and women that enlist because they wanted to go to combat, and now they're just in an army that runs 20 CTCs a year in the United States and several here in Europe. So what's the point? And I bring this up because I recently was listening to some senior Army leaders, and there's a theory out there that ready units that we just have this factory of CTC rotations, and then these units sit on their readiness in the United States, and that does not have a deterrent effect. It was a really fascinating debate to listen to, because on one side of the argument it is that is, when it comes to deterrence, that credible capability is trapped in the United States, and therefore it is not deterring anybody. And then the other side of the argument is that's absolutely false. It's not trapped because we're a force projection army. I think the Gulf War proves that side of the argument, and I think this topic that we just sort of stumbled on about having to send 4,000 paratroopers out of North Carolina to the South Asia more or less overnight, same concept. There is no trapped readiness in the United States Army, no matter where we are in the world. That's my opinion. It's a fascinating argument to listen to, though.
Yeah, we've had the discussion about what's the half-life of your readiness. Once you do that platoon or that live fire, the company CalFX, and we say yes, we made it to T1, right? So, but the day after, how much does it decrease when leaders decrease? And I think that's what you remember Objective T several years ago tried to quantify that and tried to. But really it does come down to the subjectivity of the leaders involved up and down the chain, how much trust and cohesion there is in what they have done.
We used to call it subjective T.
Yeah, it's about right. Yeah, it's about right. But when we were discussing it in Brigade Command, we calculated, well, it's been 6 months since we, did a battalion, MD ops process for an attack. Right. And so we say, well, does that mean we're downgrading our readiness? And I'm like, look, guys, it's not like a certain time expires, and if we get called, we're not going to be able to execute the mission. I mean, you could assemble a team of just about any group of officers and NCOs, and even if they hadn't known each other, if they're thrown into the fight, they would figure it out in about a day. Like, okay,
Yep.
who are you? What do you do? I know what I did in my last experience. Let's get to it, and we'll figure it out. And we go and we fight forward.
Yep. And that takes us back to the question that you asked me, right? Just about describing the experience. Because what I was about to say is, when you're rapidly deployed and you're not really sure exactly where you're going or who you're going to work for, there's a lot of loneliness there for anyone who's got the term commander in their title. But this is what mitigated that. I was sitting on an aircraft with some of the finest Americans we've ever put in uniform, some of that sitting right next to a battalion commander that I had an unbelievable amount of respect for. And there was immense comfort and confidence knowing, like, you know what, when this ramp drops, this group right here is going to figure it out. We will uphold the honor of the division and the veterans that started that war with us.
Did you feel like you arrived at that mission, having done the right things along the way? What are some of the training approaches you used in going to JRTC and to be ready for this mission?
Yeah. I think the unit had done just enough, and it goes back to what you said. You can always count on there being a critical mass of competence amongst leaders and soldiers that will carry the day in our Army, just because of the raw level of professionalism that exists in any unit you stumble across. But the unit that you're asking about, right, that deployed in the summer of 21, it had recently gone through the CTC, JRTC specifically, but the train up to get there was abridged by COVID, right? And I think the best way to answer it is to compare and contrast two completely different training paths. Well, not completely different, but two training paths that we did that both culminated with a CTC rotation and a deployment. Because our first deployment was to Afghanistan, and the second deployment we referred to as halfway to Sudan, which really only got us to Rhine Ordnance Barracks in Germany, just down the road. Yeah. But
I had forgotten about that. I remember hearing about it, but I forgot about it.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of ultimate frisbee on that deployment. So this is the one thing that's common throughout is there's a raw level of competence that you can expect out of any Army organization. There's a critical mass of NCO competence, officer competence, soldier competence that can always carry the day just because we're a professional force. In these two training paths that I can contrast, one was defined by COVID canceling all sorts of training, primarily platoon and company, which are critical. And so that's, we participated in that CTC. It went okay. Combo was horrible, which had an impact on maintaining a COP, and basically everything. If your combo is no good, everything's no good. Right. And so fast forward, nonetheless, that organization was completely capable of leading through crisis, and it did. But the next generation of the same organization, there was a uninterrupted training path with defined by a specific date that we were going to assume alert. And backwards planning before that, there was a CTC rotation. And the CTC rotation fell at the end of the training cycle, which is super convenient. Because oftentimes the way we would run a red, amber, green cycle is you don't completely control when the ASARC tells you your CTC is. And so if it's in the middle or the beginning of your training path, your intensive training cycle, I guess, completely profound impacts on how you train. Yeah. So we had a very linear path, which I think actually makes sense. And when you and I assumed command, we were still living under what I would call, I used to refer to it as the Garrett hypothesis, right? General Garrett, Force Com commander at the time, would say that, hey, you show up at the CTC in whatever condition your unit is in. And that the Army has to come to accept that, because what we don't like is when units truncate and fly through a complete linear training path that goes from individual squad and up through brigade, because you have to do that to succeed at the CTC, right? And what I think we all loved about that is, like, yes, no one likes to be at a unit that rushes or truncates everything so that you just exhaust everybody in the process of getting ready, right?
Yeah.
So the second CTC rotation, it was, General Garrett had moved on, and we were lucky enough to where we had like 4 months to train. And in 4 months, you can do a ton. And we did what everyone would recognize as the standard linear path that goes from individual all the way up through battalion FTX with an extra investment at the company level. So that organization and a ton of practice with COMO and a ton of LPDs. That organization's experience at the CTC was far more successful than the previous one, right? I was the commander both times, and I felt like I was in two different units because of the training path that we followed, which was deliberate, it was linear, and it was a investment that built a team over about 5 months. Created a really potent organization.
So what was your methodology for making sure that you had enough touch points? What was your approach for battlefield circulation? How did you get out and be at the point of importance?
Well, are you talking about Afghanistan, or are you talking in general as a brigade commander?
Really just in general as a brigade commander.
Because I think it's a more interesting answer for that question. Because this is what I found is, as you leveled up to brigade command, it's the first time in your career, unless you become a brigade XO or 3, it's the first time you're confronted with scale as a commander. The way that you deploy presence over 5,000 people, 4,000 people is different than 500, drastically in some ways. So this is how we solved it, because, I jumped into command oddly, right? Because I found battalion command to be so invigorating and inspiring, and I was inspired, and man, it was like I was on fire every day. It was so fun. And stepping into brigade command, honestly, I'd never felt less inspired. Sometimes it's like I couldn't see myself in the same space that I was as a battalion commander in brigade. And so, but this is how we solved it. This is the answer to your question. Is it was the first time in my career where I had to use a calendar to manage my day, and was generally scheduled for about 3 weeks ahead at any given point. My time was spoken for, from the moment I showed up for PT till I left. We worked with the formula where we said, okay, let's batch everything. These things we'll call meetings, and these things we'll call engagements. Okay. A meeting was anything that taught you metrics about the organization and what the organization was doing or how it was doing, things it would be doing in the future, stuff like that, right? So just imagine any time you're sitting there staring at PowerPoint, that's a meeting, And then engagements were, so meetings are things that teach you more about the organization and what it's doing. Engagements were things that taught you more about people and how they ticked. So the formula that we developed was the calendar had to be about 60% meetings and 40% engagements. Okay. Because if you were any less than 40%, then one, the subordinate leaders weren't getting the touch points and access to mentorship and leadership, and on the converse, and I wasn't getting access to the feedback loop I needed from subordinate leaders, and I wasn't having any fun. Yeah. But if my engagements exceeded 50%, I generally would get caught slipping as a commander when it comes to just running the systems, driving the ops process, which is important, right? Or I'd get caught slipping by the higher headquarters, right? Well, what do you mean you don't know the answer to this? Well, I've been spending 55% of my time in engagements and not in meetings. But that's how we figured it out, right? The balance of presence is 60% in the systems management and 40% in people management. I wish I lived in a world where it was flipped, but I didn't think brigade command in the 82nd Airborne Division at the time was one where that formula could be flipped.
Yeah. That's a great model, actually. I wish I'd have heard this 2.5 years ago. I don't think I did it right. I think I got overwhelmed by the meeting side of it, honestly. We had the deployment to OIR, so there was almost a built-in opportunity to be with the team more so. But even then, flying out from Erbil out to Western Syria was a haul. Then we had to scrap more than a few. But that's a good model. Would you cycle through? Did you have a tracker for unit by unit, leader by leader, or was it just kind of your feel like, hey, I haven't been over to Alpha Company lately, or I haven't done this?
Yeah. No, but that would have helped. The one thing that we did track was PT, right? So every morning PT was an engagement for me, because I did PT every day. In fact, for the entire week, I would do PT with the same small group of leaders, almost always people I senior rated. Okay. So same people on Monday all the way through Friday. And so sometimes it was all the company commanders from one battalion. Sometimes it was all the Alpha Company commanders of all 7 battalions. Or we would just handpick odd crowds. My favorite was HHCXOs. Oh, yeah. By far my favorite. HHCXOs
you get the unfiltered view there.
Captains. Yeah, they got nothing to lose and they're so smart, Yeah. But that's what we tracked, right? Is when was the last time you talked to this crowd? But that would have been a smart move, right? And we do that for our bosses now, you and I, right? Like we keep pie charts, like make sure that we keep everyone in the sweet spot.
Yeah. That's I was struck by the enormity of the organization, and General Richardson, when he was the regimental commander and I was the 3, he said it was just the first level where it's built out of systems, right? And it kind of alludes to what you said a second ago. That's maybe why you felt that loss a little bit, is because battalion, you're reaching out and you're touching Private Smith and you're, Sergeant Jones, and they're right there. But then at Brigade,
the feedback loop is tight and it's high fidelity. Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, and you can also to your point, you can get away with not having a disciplined calendar, not having a disciplined engagement routine at battalion, because the flash to bang is so short. Your leash is like, okay, come here, get in this breach. Oh, sorry, Major, we're about to miss this. Get over here and let's do this.
I didn't even keep a calendar in battalion command. Did you?
Okay. I would say that I intended to. The staff would probably say, no, you didn't. And even in brigade command, I was not good. That is not a strength of mine. Is staying on that, and I get sucked into having conversations. If I get in a conversation that matters, then the whole day is going to be thrown off. And I think a lot of it comes down to maybe what we're alluding to back with the data is that there have got to be key questions that you're asking and you're answering, and that's really. That's really the goal, is to get down to the thing and saying, like you said, what's correlated here? What is the real driver? It's not good enough to just say, well, here is the data point and let's move on. Like, why? Like, what are? So if I get in one of those good conversations, it's gonna run. I'm toast. We'll be there for a little bit.
And that's a great sort of model to implement that you're describing, right? Is always have in your back of your head, like, what are the big questions or the fundamental questions that you're always trying to scratch the surface of? That's why the PT program I read, my morning engagement, was the same group of people for an entire week, because it would take until Wednesday before people were having like really frank conversations, because it took till Tuesday for people to start talking shit to each other. Yeah. And then by Wednesday, you're not even deliberately asking these questions, like stuff's just coming out.
Okay. So it's the same group. So the same 5 or 10 people, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
That's a good model. That's a good model. Oh, that's cool. We ended up rotating in the morning. And so we would have, I kind of took it from the previous commander. He had some of this model too, but we took the folks who were doing good in a certain area and the folks who were not doing so good in a certain area, and we smashed them together for a group of about 6 to 15 commanders and first sergeants. And the whole topic of discussion throughout that morning session was whatever the topic was, maintenance or weapon qual or whatever it was. And then we kind of cycled through that. And so what do you look for when you are trying to identify potential? And then how do you structure that hard conversation, the one that nobody likes to have, if it's in that kind of that heart to heart about where a person's at. What are you looking for? And then how do you sit somebody down and tell them where they're at?
Yeah. Well, that last one is easier to answer. Your first question about how to manage talent. Well, I think most commanders have to accept that the talent that you're managing is actually two levels below what you think you're allowed to manage. So at the brigade level, I felt like I managed captains and below. In fact, I didn't even touch lieutenants. I left that to battalion commanders. Mm-hmm. But I had a lot of sway on which captains we hired, and where they were assigned, and that was fun. I did not, in my time, implement a system that was much more. There wasn't a lot of science to it. It was more like a board of directors of battalion commanders and me and the CSMs that would discuss like where is everybody at in their level of professionalism, where do they belong, where do they belong in the slate, how should we be selling them in the AIM market to their next organization. Mm-hmm. So it was a very subjective system, and I don't know that we were deliberate enough, or that it was honestly a model of what right looks like. To a degree, we had this luxury of being in the 82nd Airborne Division, where it's kind of like when you're looking for talent, it just wasn't hard. Like it wasn't like our buddy Matt Hardman, who was a brigade commander at Fort Polk, Louisiana. Yeah. Right. Completely different markets. But then the level of talent that I actually spent the vast majority of my time with as a leader was the majors. And that was unbelievably fulfilling. But your question about how, the hard conversations, God, was that gut wrenching. The good news about the hard conversations is, what they're going to be about. It's, at least they're black and white. They're not easy to have if you actually have a heart. But what I always found best was do not delay them. Those conversations need to happen fast, and they need to be blunt. I can think of a few, my advice to anyone that is about to do what you and I just did, which the topic we're really discussing is senior rating majors, is you have to counsel early, and you have to counsel bluntly. The only people that really had issues, I would always, one of the first things out of my mouth would be, you're struggling. And you know why. And then the conversation, those were honestly became the conversations I feared the most, -1, became actually the best conversations that I ever had in counseling. There's nothing fun about counseling somebody who's an absolute rock star. It's like, what do we talk about today?
Yeah.
You're better than me. That's one conversation. That was the toughest part of command for me, though.
Okay. Vision. So for anybody who's never been to PCC, you're going to spend at least 50% of the time talking about vision, talking about climate and culture. You're going to do workshops. You're going to talk with people. You're going to make your vision board and all this kind of stuff. So, having said that, I did make it the cornerstone of my approach to leadership. I wanted to make it a centerpiece for really to know what I wanted for the unit, and then to share with everybody else what I wanted for the unit. What was your approach to vision, and did you feel like it worked for you in Brigade Command?
Yeah, the last part of that question is actually hard. But to your point, though, like this is something that's personality specific, I think, and I don't think there's a right answer here. But you brought this up by discussing PCC. This is a funny story because it's at the root of the conversation. Before battalion command, I was at then Fort Benning, and we were going through the vision drill, right? We'd already done it at Fort Leavenworth, and we were having the same conversations down there in Georgia. And so anyhow, we had all worked on this, and we're running one morning, and we're running with a previous Ranger Battalion commander who's about to become the regimental commander, who was happened to be a mentor of mine. And as we're running, right, we're running in formation around Fort Benning at the time. And of course, an installation that's rich with symbolism everywhere you go. Mm-hmm. And so it's a very inspiring moment. But as we're running, everyone in this platoon's worth of future commanders runs up to the front and says their vision to this colonel and to the instructor, right? And we all go up and we all do it. And it's, you name every buzzword that you could think of, and like everyone ran up there and said something like that. And so anyhow, we end the run at one of the monuments out there on the regimental field. It was the Buffalo Monument, 17th Infantry. And this senior leader, now division commander, looked at us all and said, "I heard all of your visions. They were great. Almost none of you mentioned fighting. Almost none of you mentioned waging battle or winning battles. And you should really think about your vision in that context. You should ask yourself." And like, to me, that was humiliating, right? Because he was right for me, because I don't know what I said, but it was like, I was trying to pass the test, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't me. So anyhow, I think you could oversimplify my approach to this by saying I am anti-vision, or I don't deploy vision in the way that I lead. But the truth is probably more like this. I think the Army gives us our vision. It lays it out for us.
Yeah. And
who am I to reiterate that in a unique statement that's anything other than what the Army has already said? So my inspiration is what used to be ADP 1. It was called The Army. It was the number one manual of the Army, and it described what the Army was for, what we were as a profession, and what we do. And then your unit has a mission, and your unit has a medal, and your unit has a long-range calendar. So to me, that's the vision. I feel like that's all the vision you need, right? You don't need me to take the unit on a retreat and come up with our common theme. I think that works for a lot of people, and I think a lot of people have the energy to actually make that a thing. I just don't. I step in. I felt like in my last two commands, I step into the organization and say, "Hey, you see what our medal is, right? You see what it says. Well, let's teach this, right? We all get it. That's what we're for. We win battles, and these are the tasks that we do to win battles. And if you don't spend every day seeking that, that end state, then you're wrong. But you don't need me to repackage that in a vision statement, right? Because your medal, the unit mission, and what the Army is for, like that's laid out for us. And I'm just here for 2 years, and I'm going to pour myself into it with you guys. That's always kind of been my approach. So your question is, has it worked? I don't know, but it's been fun. we got some wins. To me, what helps deploy any vision, whether you're just grabbing the Army's literature and running with it, or you develop your own, is you use your long range calendar to put marks on the wall to focus that vision on a moment, right? And in the 30 months of brigade command, it was always on this date we assume alert, right? And just before that, this is our CTC date. And so I would always concentrate where the unit was going onto those key moments. Like, this is what you should feel like when you're at this moment, at the stroke of midnight, when you assume alert. So there's probably vision in that, but that's a temporal discussion about vision, as opposed to a lot of people, when you discuss vision in the Army, what they're talking about is something you brief on the first day that you're in charge, and that you iterate and repeat for 2 years.
Yeah, and may have copied word for word from somebody else, honestly.
Yeah.
I struggled. Thanks for sharing that, because you're probably in the minority of people who would say that, just, based on our institutional training and what we've heard from other leaders. But I sat down. I can tell you how many unstarted or unfinished files I have on this tablet right here of visions that I had copied from someone. I had manipulated a little bit, tweaked here and there, cut this, and it never distilled down to what was really me. It just, it didn't feel authentic. It didn't feel,
it's not easy to do. Yeah.
And the ones that are 10 pages long, like, why do I need to talk about how I want the DFAC to run? In this paragraph, why do I need to talk about, this aspect of the retention, so-and-so, like, it felt like it got watered down. And so for me, going through PCC, would have been after you, but right as People First was hitting the Army, and everyone was struggling with, how do we wrap our heads around this shift now? What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to shift now? Aren't we always about people? And so how do you really contextualize that? So it was a process for me at PCC to neck that down to what it was for me, and then what I wanted it to be for the.
This is why what you're describing is good, and my approach is weak. Oftentimes, is the Army does, like you said, the Army does have a habit of leaders creating vision, and the vision is a point of calibration for everybody, right? It keeps everyone nested. It keeps followers following on the right azimuth. So when you're a visionless leader like me, it's oftentimes the trap is I don't pick up on the cues that my higher headquarters may be constantly reiterating, because they're leading through vision, because I'm like, vision just doesn't resonate with me that much. It makes me a kind of a crappy follower sometimes, because I just don't light myself on fire for any religion, right? Except the metal. Right. But what you were able to do for your team is like, there's a constant like spot check yourself, right? Because this is the vision. We all know what it meant. Check yourself, right? Yeah.
There's strength. Honestly, like I look at what you said about putting things on the calendar, and that is the way to do it. When you can manifest your leadership into events that people can see and participate in and feel and give experience and have experience come out of, then that is a way of permanency that does live on in the organization. So I think they're complementary, honestly. I think they're, both of those talents have to be there. If you were to write a book and publish a book, what would it be about?
Sounds like work. Ooh. All right. Here's my instant response, because it's what I've been thinking about recently. It would be about the Battle of Brest in France. Okay. Just because what I've been picking up on in my research is it's a lovable battle because it's forgotten, because it was, the entire war was moving to the east, and this is one little sideshow to the west. But it captures in one battle some of the most potent lessons learned at the tactical, operational, and strategic levels of war. It's fascinating. And our very own Sergeant McVeigh earned the Medal of Honor in that battle. That's what led me down that road, like years ago. You and I discussed, we're both stationed in Europe, and we got to make the pilgrimage to the hill where he died at some point. But that's my first response, actually. And here's my second one. And this is probably my real answer. I would love to put in the amount of research, whether I actually publish the book or not. I would love to do the research required to write a book about how decision makers decide. It's so unbelievably fascinating to me. And if the Army does anything, it produces leaders who are judgment machines, good and bad. But by the time you're a battalion commander, you're getting paid more for judgment than for probably anything. At battalion command, you're probably getting paid to teach as much as to make decisions. In brigade command, you're entering into the space where you're a decision-making machine. And then now you and I work for people who are truly executives, right? They're on a conveyor belt that takes them through decisions all day long. It's just unbelievably fascinating, and just understanding how the human brain works, understanding how you create talented leaders that can become judgment machines for good.
Yeah.
To me, it's crazy.
Yeah. Okay. I'm looking forward to it then. I'll read that book.
I'll retire and then I'll see if that's
it's out there now. No, that's good, man. Well, so stick around here on the line for a second, but we'll wrap up. And just thanks for taking the time. Thanks for your leadership, kind of, not only, in the Tomahawks where I got, and by the way, your effect in the Tomahawks was exceptionally positive. I mean, it's tough to come in behind a leader like you, who's got rapport with the team and who is a fighter and the troops resonate with. Like you can speak at the soldier level, and that's something that I admired at the time and continue to. But that's been very successful. But and thanks for leading at the point of crisis. 48 to take it back to the beginning of our talk here, 48 hours and you're somewhere else in the world, man, that ain't easy to live through. It's not easy to follow through either. And I just commend you and the team for getting through it, because that's a period of American history that had to go as best it could. It wasn't going to be a home run, but we had to get the best. We had to put the best people in place to get the best out of it that we could. And I really commend you guys for doing what you did.
Well, I appreciate that. And I know myself, you were no slouch in command. It was so cool to watch you guys flourish in 1, 2, 3. And I appreciate everything you do, Drew, through the podcast and through all the writing that you do.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the time. And we gotta plan the Brest visit. Maybe in the dead of winter. We'll make it hard. We'll walk out there or something. So
yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Teddy.
Yeah. Thank you.